The clock on my nightstand glowed 12:47 a.m. when Alison finally came home. I'd been lying there in the dark for 3 hours, listening to the house settle around me like an old man's bones, thinking about how marriage becomes this weird game of pretending you don't notice things. The front door clicked shut with that careful, guilty softness that screams, "I'm trying not to wake anyone up because I've been somewhere I shouldn't have been." My name is Nick Stedman, and I'm a building contractor in this sleepy New England town that looks like it fell out of a Stephen King novel. Maple trees line every street, white picket fences guard modest colonial houses, and everyone knows everyone else's business by Thursday morning coffee. I've lived here my whole life, married my high school sweetheart, and spent 15 years thinking I had it all figured out. Turns out, I didn't know anything. Alison slipped into our bedroom like a ghost, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. Even in the darkness, I could smell her perfume mixed with something else, cologne that wasn't mine. She thought I was asleep. Hell, maybe she hoped I was. "Long meeting?" I asked, my voice cutting through the silence like a saw through pine. She jumped. Actually jumped. "Nick, you scared me. I thought you were sleeping." Hard to sleep when your wife doesn't come home until almost 1 a.m. I sat up and clicked on the bedside lamp. The sudden light made her squint, and I got a good look at her. Alison was 32, still beautiful in that sharp, ambitious way that had caught my attention in high school. Her blonde hair was slightly messed up, her lipstick was gone, and her blouse was wrinkled in a way that suggested it had been removed and put back on in a hurry. The Patterson case is really complex. We had to stay late to go through all the documents. She was already moving toward the bathroom, not meeting my eyes. "Must have been some documents." "What's that supposed to mean?" I shrugged. "Nothing. Just making conversation with my wife." She paused at the bathroom doorway. "Look, I know I've been working late a lot lately. The firm is really pushing everyone hard right now. But it's good money, Nick. We need the money." Before we deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. That stung, and she knew it would. My construction business had been slow this winter. Not my fault. Nobody builds additions when there's 3 feet of snow on the ground, but it still made me feel like I wasn't pulling my weight. Alison worked as a paralegal at Henderson, Brooks & Associates, the biggest law firm in town, and she never let me forget that her paycheck was steady while mine fluctuated with the seasons. "Right," I said. "The money." She disappeared into the bathroom, and I heard the shower start running at 1 a.m, because apparently reviewing legal documents makes you need an immediate shower. I lay back down and stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. This wasn't the first late night. Hell, it wasn't even the 10th. For the past 6 months, Alison had been working late at least 3 nights a week. She'd also started going to the gym more often, buying new clothes, and paying a lot more attention to her appearance. Classic signs, right? The kind of thing they write about in those "Is your spouse cheating?" articles that I'd never thought I'd need to read. But I had read them. Late at night, when she was at another meeting, I'd sit in my home office with a beer and Google search terms like "wife acting distant" and "signs of infidelity." The internet had plenty to say on the subject, none of it comforting. The shower shut off, and a few minutes later, Alison came out wearing her favorite silk pajamas, the ones she usually saved for special occasions. She slipped into bed beside me, smelling like expensive soap and guilt. "Nick," she said softly. "Yeah? We need to talk." 4 words. 4 simple words that can change everything. I'd been expecting this conversation for months, but I still wasn't ready for it. "Okay," I said. "Let's talk." She was quiet for a long moment, and I could feel her gathering courage. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm pregnant." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Pregnant. After 15 years of marriage, after we'd given up trying 5 years ago, after all those discussions about how we were fine, just the 2 of us, she was pregnant. I started, then stopped. Something in her tone wasn't right. This wasn't happy news. This wasn't, "Honey, we're finally having a baby" news. This was something else entirely. "That's wonderful," I finished lamely. "Nick." She turned to face me, and in the dim light from the hallway, I could see tears in her eyes. "I'm not sure if it's yours." And there it was, the punchline to a joke I hadn't realized I was part of. I sat up slowly, my mind trying to process what she'd just said. "Come again?" "The timing, it could be yours, but it might not be." "Might not be." I repeated the words like I was learning a foreign language. "Meaning what, exactly?" She was crying now, but somehow it felt calculated, like she'd practiced this scene in the mirror. I made a mistake, Nick. A terrible mistake. I've been seeing someone. Someone. It doesn't mean anything. It was just, I don't know. I felt trapped. Like my life was just going to be the same thing forever. Work, home, work, home. I needed to feel alive again. I got out of bed and walked to the window, our backyard stretched out in the moonlight, the old oak tree casting long shadows across the snow. I'd built a swing on that tree 10 years ago, thinking maybe someday we'd have kids to use it. The swing was still there, swaying slightly in the winter wind. How long? I asked. Does it matter? I turned around. Yeah, Alison, it matters. 6 months? Maybe 7. 7 months? While I was working 60-hour weeks to keep us afloat during the slow season, while I was worrying about mortgage payments and trying to drum up business, my wife was having an affair, and now she was pregnant with another man's child. Who is he? Nick, please. Who? She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Greg Palmer. Greg Palmer. Of course it was Greg Palmer. The golden boy of our little town, the real estate agent with the perfect smile and the expensive car. The guy who sold houses to rich folks from Boston looking for their quaint New England getaway. The guy who'd been hitting on Alison at every town function for the past 5 years, right in front of me, like I was invisible. Greg Palmer, I said. Well, that makes perfect sense. It's not what you think. What I think is that my wife has been screwing the town pretty boy for 7 months, and now she's carrying his kid. What part of that am I getting wrong? She flinched. You don't have to be cruel about it. Cruel. That was rich. I walked back to the bed and sat down on the edge, suddenly feeling very tired. So what now? I asked. What's the plan here, Alison? You want a divorce? You want to run off with Greg and play house? I want to know whose baby this is. I want to take a test. A paternity test? Yes? I almost laughed. Almost. Here she was, confessing to a 7-month affair, pregnant with another man's child, and she wanted to take a test to make sure. Like there was some chance in hell that this baby was mine when we hadn't had intimate relations in months. Okay, I said. She blinked. Okay? Yeah, let's take the test. Let's find out whose baby you're carrying. She'd expected me to yell, to throw things, to storm out of the house. Instead, I was calm. Eerily calm. And that seemed to unnerve her more than anger would have. You're not mad? I looked at her. Really looked at her. This woman I'd loved since I was 17, who I'd married in the little church on Main Street, who I'd built a life with. She looked like a stranger. Oh, I'm furious, I said quietly. But getting mad right now won't change anything. Let's get the test done first. Then we'll figure out what comes next. She nodded, relief flooding her face. She probably thought I was going to be reasonable about this. Probably thought we could work it out, go to counseling, rebuild our marriage. She had no idea what was coming. Dr. Kessler had been delivering babies in our town for 30 years, and he'd seen it all. Nothing surprised him anymore, which is probably why he didn't bat an eye when Alison and I walked into his office the next morning requesting a paternity test. Well, he said, leaning back in his chair and studying us over his reading glasses, this is becoming more common than you might think. Technology makes these things easier to sort out than they used to be. He was a thin man in his 60s with gray hair and a dry sense of humor that I'd always appreciated. He'd been our family doctor since we moved to town, and he knew us well enough to read between the lines. How does it work? Alison asked. She was sitting on the edge of her chair, nervous energy radiating from her like heat from a furnace. Simple enough. We take a small sample from the fetus. Completely safe, I assure you, and compare it to samples from both potential fathers. Results are 99.9% accurate. Both potential fathers, I repeated. That would be you and... Dr. Kessler consulted his notes. Mr. Palmer, I assume? He'll need to come in for his sample as well. Alison shifted uncomfortably. I haven't told him about the test yet. Ah, Dr. Kessler nodded knowingly. Well, that's a conversation you'll need to have. Can't run the test without his cooperation. I could see Alison's mind working, probably figuring out how to explain to her lover that she needed him to take a paternity test. This was getting better by the minute. How long for results? I asked. 2 weeks, typically. Sometimes sooner if we rush it, but I don't see any urgent medical need here. 2 weeks, 14 days to live in limbo, knowing my marriage was over but not yet knowing the full extent of the damage. 14 days to plan my next move. We'll take the standard timeline, I said. After the appointment, we drove home in silence. Alison kept glancing at me, probably trying to gauge my mood. I kept my eyes on the road and my thoughts to myself. I need to call Greg, she said as we pulled into our driveway. I figured. Nick, I know this is hard. Don't, I cut her off. Just don't. Make your call. I went into my workshop in the basement and tried to lose myself in work. I was refinishing an antique dining table for Mrs. Henderson from the law firm, ironic, considering her employee was currently upstairs calling her lover to arrange a paternity test. The rhythmic motion of sanding helped calm my mind and let me think clearly. I could hear Alison's voice upstairs, muffled through the floor. The conversation went on for a long time. Lots of pauses, lots of, I know, and we have to. When she finally hung up, the house went quiet. An hour later, she came downstairs. "He'll do the test," she said. "How generous of him. Nick, please, this is hard enough without the sarcasm." I looked up from the table. "Hard for who, exactly? You? The woman who's been lying to me for 7 months? Or me, the idiot husband who's been working his tail off while his wife screws around with the local golden boy?" She flinched again. Good. I wanted her to flinch. I never meant for this to happen. But it did happen, and now we're here. I went back to sanding. "So Greg's okay with taking the test? He's not worried about what people will think when word gets out?" Because word would get out. In a town this size, you couldn't sneeze without 3 people offering you tissues. A paternity test involving the town's most prominent real estate agent was going to be front-page news at every coffee shop and bar. "He's concerned about discretion," Alison said carefully. "I bet he is. Dr. Kessler says he keeps these things confidential." "Sure he does. Just like everyone else in this town keeps things confidential." She stood there for a few more minutes, watching me work. I could feel her wanting to say something else, but I wasn't in the mood to make this easier for her. Finally, she went back upstairs, and I heard her moving around the kitchen, probably making coffee and trying to figure out how her life had gotten so complicated. The truth was, I wasn't surprised by any of this. Disappointed, hurt, angry as hell, but not surprised. The signs had been there for months. I'd just chosen to ignore them because it was easier than dealing with the reality. But now reality was staring me in the face, and I had 2 weeks to decide what to do about it. I spent the rest of the day in my workshop, thinking and planning. By evening, I had the beginnings of an idea. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't noble, but it was thorough. If Alison wanted to play games, I could play games too. And I'd been underestimated my whole life, by teachers, by employers, by my own wife. People saw a blue-collar contractor and assumed I was simple, straightforward, predictable. They were about to learn how wrong they were. That night, Alison made dinner, her way of trying to act normal, I suppose. We sat at the kitchen table like we had thousands of times before, eating pot roast and making small talk about the weather and local news. It was surreal, like we were actors playing the roles of a married couple. "Mrs. Henderson called," she said, cutting her meat into precise little pieces. She wanted to know how the table was coming along. "Almost done. Should be ready by Friday." She's very particular about her antiques. Most people are, when they're worth more than my truck. We fell back into silence. The elephant in the room was so big it was practically sitting at the table with us, but neither of us acknowledged it. After dinner, I helped with the dishes, old habits and all that. As I was drawing a plate, Alison's phone buzzed with a text message. She grabbed it quickly, read the message, and deleted it. "Work?" I asked innocently. "Just Chloe, asking about lunch tomorrow." Chloe was Alison's best friend and co-worker, a gossip who knew everyone's business and loved to share it. If Chloe was involved in lunch plans, she probably knew about the affair. Hell, she'd probably been encouraging it. "Tell her I said hi," I said. That night, I lay awake long after Alison fell asleep, staring at the ceiling and listening to her breathe. 15 years of marriage, and it was ending like this. Not with a bang, but with a whimper and a paternity test. But it didn't have to end quietly. In fact, I was starting to think it shouldn't. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before in 15 years of marriage. I went through Alison's phone. She was in the shower, getting ready for work, and her phone was charging on the nightstand. I'd watched her enter her passcode enough times to memorize it, our wedding anniversary, because even cheaters can be sentimental. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Months of text messages between Alison and Greg. Not just the physical stuff, but emotional intimacy that cut deeper than any physical betrayal. Messages about how unhappy she was, how she felt stuck with me, how Greg made her feel alive again. There were photos, too. Nothing explicit, but intimate enough to make my stomach turn. But the real kicker was the group chat between Alison, Greg, and Chloe. 3 months of messages about their situation, with Chloe acting as cheerleader and advisor. She'd helped them coordinate their meetings, provided alibis, even suggested restaurants for their dates. The most recent messages were about the pregnancy and the paternity test. Greg was worried about his reputation. Chloe was advising Alison to keep Nick calm until they knew for sure whose baby it was. There was even discussion about what would happen if the baby was mine. Apparently, they'd been hoping it would be Greg's so Alison could leave me with a clear conscience. I took screenshots of everything and emailed them to myself from Alison's phone, then deleted the sent message. By the time she came out of the shower, I was downstairs making coffee like nothing had happened. "Morning," she said, kissing my cheek out of habit. "Morning. Sleep well?" "Not really. This whole situation has me stressed out." "I'll bet it does," I thought. After she left for work, I drove to the Rookery, the local blue-collar bar where I sometimes grabbed lunch. It was the kind of place where construction workers, mechanics, and other working folks gathered to complain about their jobs and their wives, though in my case, the complaints were about to get a lot more specific. Lou Marconi owned the Rookery, and he was the unofficial mayor of the town's gossip network. He was a former boxer in his 60s, built like a fire hydrant, with hands the size of dinner plates and ears that had heard every secret in town at least twice. "Nick," he called out as I walked in. "Little early for you, isn't it?" "Needed to get out of the house," I said, sliding onto a bar stool. "Give me a coffee and whatever wisdom you're dispensing today." Lou poured me a cup of coffee that could strip paint and leaned against the bar. "You look like a man with something on his mind." "You could say that. Want to talk about it?" I pretended to consider this, like the idea of confiding in Lou had just occurred to me. "You know Greg Palmer pretty well?" Lou's eyebrows went up. In a town this size, that was a loaded question. "Well enough. Why?" "Just curious about his reputation. As a businessman, I mean." "As a businessman?" Lou chuckled. "Kid sells houses to rich folks from the city. Makes good money at it, too. Drives that fancy BMW, lives in the new development up on the hill." "What about his personal life?" "Now that's a different story." Lou glanced around the empty bar, then leaned closer. "Let's just say Greg likes the ladies, and the ladies like Greg. Even the married ones, if you catch my drift." "Married ones?" "Nick, I've been in this business for 30 years. I see things, I hear things. Greg Palmer has been making the rounds with more than one unhappy wife in this town." My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. "Anyone I know?" Lou studied my face carefully. He was no fool. He could see where this conversation was heading. "Nick," he said quietly, "whatever you're thinking about doing, think it through first. Greg Palmer's got friends in this town. Important friends." "What kind of friends?" "The kind that sit on the town council, the kind that approve building permits and business licenses." It was a warning, and I appreciated it, but it was also information I could use. "Thanks for the advice, Lou." "Anytime. And Nick, if you need someone to talk to, you know where to find me." I spent the rest of the morning driving around town, thinking. By noon, I had the outline of a plan. It wasn't complicated. The best plans never are. But it would require patience, timing, and a willingness to let Alison and Greg think they were in control right up until the moment I pulled the rug out from under them. My first stop was the electronics store. I told the kid behind the counter that I was worried about security at my house and needed to upgrade my surveillance system. He sold me a package of small wireless cameras that could connect to my phone and record everything to cloud storage. "These are great for keeping an eye on things when you're not home," he said enthusiastically. "Motion-activated, night vision, the works." "Perfect." Next, I stopped by my brother Steve's house. Steve was 3 years older than me, a retired cop who now worked as a private investigator. He'd always been the smart one in the family, the one who went to college and made something of himself. But we'd stayed close over the years, and I knew I could trust him. "Nick," he said, opening the door. "What brings you by?" "Need some advice about a legal matter." Steve's expression grew serious. He invited me in, poured us both a beer, and listened while I explained the situation. I didn't tell him about my plans, just the basic facts about Alison's affair and the paternity test. "I'm sorry, man," he said when I finished. "That's rough." "Yeah, well, it is what it is. What are you going to do?" "Depends on the test results, I guess." Steve nodded, but I could see him studying my face. He knew me well enough to sense there was more to the story. "Nick, if you're thinking about doing something stupid," define stupid. "Anything that could land you in trouble, anything that could hurt your case in a divorce. What if I'm not thinking about divorce? What if I'm thinking about something else?" "Like what?" I finished my beer and stood up. "Like making sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of people Alison and Greg Palmer really are." Steve was quiet for a long moment. "Be careful, Nick. Revenge has a way of backfiring. So does betrayal." That evening, while Alison was at another late meeting, I installed the cameras. One in our bedroom, hidden behind a picture frame. One in the living room, tucked behind some books. One in the kitchen, positioned to catch the breakfast table where Alison made her phone calls. I wasn't planning to catch them in the act. I already had enough evidence of the affair. But I wanted to document everything that happened over the next 2 weeks. Every lie, every secret phone call, every moment of deception. Because when this was all over, I wanted a complete record of exactly how my marriage had ended. By the time Alison came home that night, I was in bed reading a book about home renovation, looking like the same predictable, boring husband she'd been cheating on for 7 months. "How was your day?" she asked, changing into her pajamas. "Quiet. Worked on the Henderson table, ran some errands." "That's nice." She climbed into bed beside me, and we lay there in the dark like strangers sharing a hotel room. In 2 weeks, we'd have the test results. In 2 weeks, this charade would be over. I couldn't wait. Over the next week, I learned more about my wife's deception than I ever wanted to know. The cameras I'd installed captured everything. Phone calls with Greg where they discussed their future together, conversations with Chloe where they laughed about how clueless I was, and moments of casual cruelty that cut deeper than any physical betrayal. The worst part wasn't the affair itself. It was discovering how little respect Alison had for me. In her mind, I was a simple, predictable man who would never figure out what was happening right under his nose. She talked about me like I was a pet that needed to be managed, not a husband who deserved honesty. "He's been so sweet lately," she said to Chloe during one phone call, not realizing the irony. "I almost feel bad about everything." "Don't feel bad," Chloe replied. "You deserve to be happy. You've been stuck in that house with him for 15 years. It's time you lived a little." "I know, but still, he's a good man. He doesn't deserve this." "Then why are you doing it?" There was a long pause. "Because I can't spend the rest of my life wondering, what if? Greg makes me feel things that Nick never did." "What kind of things?" "Excitement, passion, like I'm special, not just another piece of furniture in his life." That hurt more than I'd expected, because the truth was, I had started taking Alison for granted over the years. Marriage does that to you. You get comfortable, you stop trying as hard, you assume the other person will always be there. But instead of talking to me about it, instead of trying to work on our relationship, she'd decided to find excitement elsewhere. The cameras also captured Greg's visits to our house. 3 times that week, he came by while I was at work, staying for hours. They didn't use our bedroom. Even Alison wasn't that brazen. But they sat on our couch, ate food from our kitchen, and planned their future in the home I'd been paying for. Greg was everything I wasn't. Smooth, confident, well-dressed, and wealthy. He drove a BMW, lived in a house worth 3 times what mine was, and had the kind of easy charm that opened doors and impressed people. I could see why Alison was attracted to him. What I couldn't understand was why she'd married me in the first place, if that was what she really wanted. But I was learning something else from the surveillance. Greg Palmer wasn't as perfect as he appeared. During one conversation with Alison, he mentioned some creative financing he'd used to close a recent real estate deal. Another time, he bragged about overcharging clients who didn't know the local market. He was cutting corners, bending rules, and using his reputation to cover up practices that probably violated state real estate regulations. That information went into a file I was building, not for immediate use, but for later. When the time came to bring Greg down, I wanted to have multiple angles of attack. The paternity test appointment was scheduled for Friday. Greg would come in separately from us, provide his sample, and then we'd all wait for the results. Alison was nervous about the whole thing, worried that people would see Greg at Dr. Kessler's office and put 2 and 2 together. Maybe he should go to a different doctor, she suggested over breakfast Thursday morning. Too late to change now, I said, buttering my toast. Besides, Dr. Kessler's the best in town. We want accurate results, don't we? She nodded, but I could see her mind working. She was probably calculating the odds that someone would see Greg and start asking questions. Nick, she said carefully, after we get the results, we need to talk about what happens next. What happens next depends on whose baby you're carrying. But either way, our marriage is... we can't just pretend this didn't happen. I looked up from my breakfast. What are you saying, Alison? I'm saying maybe we should start thinking about a separation. Just temporarily, while we figure things out. A separation. How convenient. She could move in with Greg, play house with her new boyfriend, and keep me on the hook in case things didn't work out. The perfect backup plan. Let's wait for the test results, I said. Then we'll figure out what comes next. That afternoon, I got a call from Emma Rodriguez, our next-door neighbor. Emma was a single mom in her 40s, sharp as a tack, and one of the few people in town who'd never been fooled by Greg Palmer's charm. Nick, she said, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I wanted to give you a heads up about something. What's that? I've been seeing a lot of activity at your house during the day. Cars I don't recognize, people coming and going when you're not home. Emma was being diplomatic, but I knew what she was really saying. She'd seen Greg's BMW in my driveway and put the pieces together. I appreciate you looking out for us, I said. Nick, I don't know what's going on, and it's not my business. But if you ever need someone to talk to, or if there's anything I can do to help, thanks, Emma. That means a lot. After I hung up, I realized that Emma might be a valuable ally. She was observant, trustworthy, and clearly suspicious of what was happening. When the time came to make my move, I might need witnesses who could corroborate my story. That evening, Alison was unusually quiet during dinner. She picked at her food and kept checking her phone, waiting for messages that didn't come. Everything okay? I asked. Just nervous about tomorrow? The test? Yeah. Once we do this, there's no going back. Everything changes. She was right about that, but not in the way she thought. Alison, I said, can I ask you something? Sure. When did you stop loving me? The question caught her off guard. She put down her fork and looked at me with something that might have been guilt. I never stopped loving you, Nick. That's what makes this so hard. But you love him too. Yes. More than me? She was quiet for a long time. Differently than you. What does that mean? It means, with you, love feels safe, comfortable, predictable. With Greg, it feels dangerous, exciting, like anything could happen. And dangerous is better than safe? Not better, just different. I spent 15 years being safe, Nick. I wanted to know what dangerous felt like. I nodded like I understood, but inside I was calculating. Dangerous. She wanted dangerous. Well, she was about to get more dangerous than she'd bargained for, because tomorrow we'd take the test, and in 2 weeks we'd have the results. And then Alison Stedman, would discover that her boring, predictable husband could be very dangerous indeed. Dr. Kessler called on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks and 1 day after we'd taken the test. I was in my workshop, putting the finishing touches on a cabinet for the library, when my phone rang. Nick, could you and Alison come in this afternoon? I have your results. Both of us? I think it would be best, yes. His tone told me everything I needed to know, but I played dumb. Is there a problem with the test? No problem. Just results that need to be discussed in person. I called Alison at work. Dr. Kessler wants to see us this afternoon. There was a long pause. Both of us? That's what he said. Oh, God, this is it, isn't it? Looks like it. We met at the doctor's office at 4 o'clock. Alison looked pale and nervous, fidgeting with her purse strap and avoiding eye contact. I felt strangely calm, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. Dr. Kessler invited us into his office and closed the door. He had a manila folder on his desk, and he opened it slowly, like he was handling something fragile. Well, he said, I have your results. And I have to say, in 30 years of practice, I've rarely seen anything quite like this. Alison gripped the arms of her chair. What do you mean? I mean, the results are very clear. Nick, you are definitely not the father of this child. I nodded. No surprise there. But here's the interesting part, Dr. Kessler continued. Based on the genetic markers and the conception date, this child was conceived approximately 8 months ago, not 6 or 7, as you initially thought. 8 months. Alison's face went white. 8 months? She whispered. Yes, which means this affair has been going on longer than you told your husband. The room went quiet, except for the sound of Alison's ragged breathing. She'd lied about the timeline, probably trying to minimize the betrayal. But DNA doesn't lie. There's more, Dr. Kessler said. The genetic analysis also revealed some other interesting information about the biological father. What kind of information? I asked. Without going into too much detail, let's just say Mr. Palmer might want to get some additional medical tests done. There are some genetic markers that suggest he should be screened for certain hereditary conditions. Alison looked like she was going to be sick. What kind of conditions? I can't discuss another patient's medical information in detail, but I'd recommend he see his own doctor for a full workup. We left the office in silence. In the parking lot, Alison finally broke down. 8 months, she said, tears streaming down her face. Nick, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to lie about the timeline. I was just trying to... Trying to what? Make it seem less awful than it was? Yes. No, I don't know. I was scared. Scared of what? Scared of losing you. Scared of losing everything. I looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who'd shared my bed for 15 years, who'd promised to love and honor me, who'd been lying to my face for 8 months. You should have thought of that before you started screwing Greg Palmer. She flinched. What happens now? Now? Now you call Greg and tell him he's going to be a daddy, and then you figure out where you're going to live, because it's not going to be in my house. Nick, please, can't we talk about this? We just did. I drove home alone, leaving Alison in the parking lot with her phone and her tears. When I got to the house, I poured myself a whiskey and sat in my workshop, thinking about the next phase of my plan. The paternity test had confirmed what I already knew, but it had also given me something I hadn't expected: ammunition. Greg Palmer had genetic markers for hereditary conditions. That information, combined with what I'd learned about his questionable business practices, gave me multiple ways to destroy his reputation. But I wasn't going to move too quickly. Revenge is like fine woodworking. It requires patience, precision, and attention to detail. Rush the job, and you end up with something sloppy that falls apart under pressure. Alison came home 2 hours later, red-eyed and defeated. I told him, she said. How'd he take it? He's processing it. I'll bet he was. Finding out you're going to be a father is one thing. Finding out you might have genetic conditions that could affect your child is something else entirely. What did he say about the medical stuff? He's going to see his doctor tomorrow. Good for him. We stood there in our kitchen, two people who'd shared 15 years of marriage, and I felt absolutely nothing for her. No love, no hate, no anger, just a cold, empty space where my feelings used to be. I'll start looking for an apartment tomorrow, she said. That's probably best. Nick, I know you hate me right now. I don't hate you, Alison. I don't feel anything for you at all, and that's worse than hate. She started crying again, but I was done with her tears. I'd seen her cry on command too many times over the past 2 weeks to be moved by it anymore. That night, she slept in the guest room. I lay in our bed, my bed now, and planned the next phase of my campaign. The paternity test was just the beginning. By the time I was finished, everyone in town would know exactly what kind of people Alison and Greg Palmer really were, and they'd know that Nick Stedman wasn't the simple, predictable man they'd all underestimated. The real fun was just getting started. I gave Alison a week to find an apartment and start moving her things out. During that time, I was the picture of civilized behavior, helping her pack, being cordial when we passed in the hallway, even offering to help her move furniture. She seemed surprised by my reasonableness, probably expecting me to be bitter and vindictive. She had no idea what was coming. The first phase of my plan was simple: let the truth spread naturally. In a town like ours, secrets have a half-life of about 48 hours. All I had to do was provide the right catalyst. I started with Emma, my observant neighbor. On Saturday morning, I was loading Alison's boxes into her car when Emma came over to help. Moving out? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Yeah, we're getting a divorce. I'm sorry to hear that, Nick. You seemed like such a solid couple. Seemed being the operative word. I hefted a box of Alison's clothes. Turns out she's been having an affair with Greg Palmer for the past 8 months. She's pregnant with his kid. Emma's eyes widened. Greg Palmer? The real estate agent? The very one. Nick, I'm so sorry. I had no idea it was that serious. Neither did I, until she told me she wasn't sure whose baby she was carrying. Emma shook her head in disgust. Some people have no shame. By Monday morning, half the town knew about Alison's affair. By Tuesday, the other half had heard. By Wednesday, the story had grown in the telling, as stories do in small towns, and people were talking about Greg Palmer's pattern of seducing married women. But I wasn't content to let gossip do all the work. But I had bigger plans. My next stop was the State Real Estate Licensing Board. I'd done my research and put together a comprehensive complaint about Greg's business practices, complete with documentation of his creative financing and his habit of overcharging out-of-town clients. The complaint was anonymous, but it was thorough and damning. Then I visited the town planning office, where Greg's friend on the town council worked. I introduced myself as a concerned citizen who'd heard rumors about conflicts of interest in the approval process for certain real estate developments. I didn't make any specific accusations, just asked a lot of questions and mentioned that I'd heard Greg Palmer's name come up in connection with some questionable deals. The beauty of this approach was that I wasn't doing anything illegal or unethical. I was simply sharing information that was already public record, asking legitimate questions, and letting other people draw their own conclusions. Meanwhile, Alison was discovering that her new life wasn't quite as glamorous as she'd imagined. Greg, faced with the reality of becoming a father and dealing with potential medical issues, was having second thoughts about their relationship. According to my sources at the Rookery, Lou had become my unofficial intelligence network. Greg was telling people that Alison had trapped him and that he'd never promised her anything permanent. The medical tests Dr. Kessler had recommended revealed that Greg carried genetic markers for several conditions that could be passed on to his children. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to complicate his perfect image and make him worry about his future. Alison, meanwhile, was struggling to find an apartment she could afford on her paralegal salary. She'd gotten used to living on 2 incomes, and the reality of single motherhood was starting to sink in. 2 weeks after she moved out, Alison called me. "Nick, we need to talk." "About what?" "About us. About what happens next." "I thought we'd covered that. You're having Greg's baby, you're getting divorced, and you're starting a new life. What's left to discuss?" "It's not that simple." "Sure it is. Greg and we're going through a rough patch." I almost laughed. "Trouble in paradise?" "He's scared about the baby, about the medical stuff. He's pulling away." "And you want to come home?" "I want to talk about it." "No." "Nick, please, I made a mistake. A huge mistake. But we were married for 15 years. That has to count for something." "It did count for something. Right up until you decided to throw it away for 8 months of excitement with Greg Palmer." "I know I hurt you." "You didn't hurt me, Alison. You freed me. You showed me exactly who you really are, and now I can make decisions based on that information." "What kind of decisions?" "The kind that don't involve you." She was quiet for a long moment. "The whole town is talking about us." "I imagine they are. People are saying terrible things about me. About Greg." "Are they true?" "That's not the point." "Actually, that's exactly the point. If people are saying you had an 8-month affair and got pregnant with another man's child, and that's exactly what happened, then they're not saying terrible things about you. They're just saying true things that happen to be terrible." "You're enjoying this." "I'm not enjoying anything, Alison. I'm just not protecting you from the consequences of your choices anymore." After I hung up, I sat in my workshop and thought about how much my life had changed in just a few weeks. A month ago, I'd been a married man, worried about mortgage payments and business prospects. Now I was single, financially stable. Alison's lawyer bills were her problem now, and planning the next phase of my new life. But I wasn't finished with Greg Palmer yet, not by a long shot. The Real Estate Licensing Board had opened an investigation into his business practices. The town council was asking questions about his relationships with local officials. And his reputation as the golden boy of local real estate was crumbling as more stories emerged about his pattern of pursuing married women. But I wanted to make sure he understood that there were consequences for his actions. Personal consequences. It was time for a face-to-face conversation. I found Greg Palmer on a Thursday evening at the country club, having drinks with some clients from Boston. He was in his element, expensive suit, perfect smile, charm turned up to 11 as he sold them on the idea of investing in local real estate. I waited until his clients left, then walked over to his table. "Greg, mind if I sit down?" He looked up, and I saw something flicker across his face. Fear? Guilt? Hard to tell with a guy who'd spent his whole life practicing fake expressions. "Nick, I was wondering when you'd show up." "Were you?" "Look, I know this is awkward." "Awkward." I sat down without waiting for an invitation. That's one word for it. Greg glanced around the club, probably hoping someone would interrupt us. But it was late, and most of the other members had gone home to their families. "I want you to know that I never meant for things to go this far," he said. "How far did you mean for them to go?" "I don't know. It just happened. For 8 months, it just happened." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Alison told you about the timeline." "The timeline, the pregnancy, the genetic testing. She told me everything." "Nick, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean much coming from me, but I am." I studied his face. He looked older than I remembered, tired around the edges. The stress of the past few weeks was showing. "Are you sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught?" "Both, I guess." "At least you're honest about that." We sat in silence for a moment. Around us, the country club hummed with quiet wealth. Leather chairs, crystal glasses, oil paintings of local landscapes. This was Greg's world, and he fit into it perfectly. "What do you want, Nick?" "I want you to understand something." "What's that?" "For 15 years, people in this town have looked at me and seen exactly what they expected to see. A simple contractor, a blue-collar guy who fixes things and keeps his mouth shut. Predictable, harmless, easy to overlook." "Nick, I'm not finished." My voice was quiet, but there was steel in it. "You looked at my wife and saw an easy target, a bored housewife married to a boring man. You figured you could take whatever you wanted, and I'd never be smart enough or tough enough to do anything about it." Greg was starting to sweat despite the air conditioning. You were wrong about that, I continued. I'm not harmless, I'm not predictable, and I'm definitely not finished with you. What's that supposed to mean? It means your real estate license is under investigation. It means the town council is asking questions about your business relationships. It means your reputation is shot, your clients are nervous, and your perfect life is falling apart. You can't prove I did anything illegal. I don't have to prove anything. I just have to ask the right questions and let other people draw their own conclusions. Greg leaned forward. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining your situation. There's a difference. And what about Alison? She's carrying my child. Doesn't that matter to you? Alison made her choice. Now she gets to live with it. Just like you do. I stood up to leave, then turned back. Oh, and Greg, that genetic testing Dr. Kessler recommended, you might want to follow up on that. I'd hate for your child to inherit any unpleasant surprises. His face went pale. How do you know about that? Small town. People talk. I walked away, leaving him sitting alone at his table with his expensive whiskey and his expensive problems. Outside, the evening air was cool and clean. I felt better than I had in months. Not happy exactly, but satisfied, like I'd finally started balancing the scales. But I wasn't done yet, not even close. The next morning, I got a call from Steve, my brother. Nick, we need to talk. About what? About whatever you're doing to Greg Palmer. I'm not doing anything to Greg Palmer. Come on. The whole town is talking about how his business is falling apart, how he's under investigation, how his reputation is ruined, and it all started right after your wife moved out. Coincidence? Right. Look, I'm not saying the guy doesn't deserve it, but you need to be careful. If this comes back to you, it won't. How can you be sure? Because I haven't done anything illegal. I haven't threatened anyone. I haven't broken any laws. I've just shared some information and asked some questions. Steve was quiet for a moment. You're playing a dangerous game. No, I'm playing a smart game. There's a difference. After I hung up, I thought about Steve's warning. He was right that I was taking risks. But some things are worth the risk. That afternoon, I drove past Greg's office. There was a for lease sign in the window. According to Lou at the Rookery, Greg had lost 3 major clients in the past week, and his business partner was looking for a way out of their partnership. It was amazing how quickly a reputation could crumble once people started asking the right questions. But the best part was yet to come. Because I'd learned something interesting about Greg Palmer, something that was going to make the next phase of my plan even more satisfying. He had a secret of his own, a secret that made his affair with Alison look like small potatoes, and I was going to make sure everyone in town learned about it. The secret I'd discovered about Greg Palmer was better than I could have hoped for. It came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman whose antique table I'd been refinishing. She'd called to arrange pickup of the table, and during our conversation, she'd mentioned something interesting. You know, Nick, I feel terrible about what happened with your wife and that Palmer boy. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I appreciate that. He's always been trouble, that one. Even in high school, he was cutting corners and charming his way out of consequences. You knew him in high school? Oh, yes. I taught English at the high school for 30 years before I retired. Greg was in my class, along with his cousin Tommy. Tommy Palmer? Tommy Richardson. He took his stepfather's name when his mother remarried. But he and Greg were thick as thieves back then. Tommy Richardson. The name rang a bell, but I couldn't place it immediately. Whatever happened to Tommy? I asked. Oh, he went to prison about 5 years ago. Embezzlement, I think. He was working for some investment firm in Boston, stealing from client accounts. That's when it clicked. Tommy Richardson had been all over the local news 5 years ago, a local boy who'd made it big in Boston, only to get caught stealing millions from his clients. It had been a huge scandal. He and Greg were cousins? First cousins, very close growing up. In fact, I always suspected Greg helped Tommy hide some of that stolen money, but nothing was ever proven. After Mrs. Henderson hung up, I did some research. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Tommy Richardson had been convicted of embezzling $3.2 million from his investment clients. Most of the money was never recovered. The FBI had investigated several of Tommy's relatives and associates, including Greg Palmer, but they'd never found enough evidence to bring charges. But what if the evidence was still out there? What if Greg really had helped his cousin hide the money? I spent the weekend digging through public records, news articles, and real estate transactions. What I found was a pattern of suspicious activity around the time of Tommy's arrest. Greg had purchased several properties using cash during that period, unusual for someone in the real estate business, who typically used financing to leverage their investments. He'd also made several large deposits into various bank accounts, always just under the reporting threshold that would trigger federal scrutiny. None of it was proof of criminal activity, but it painted a picture of someone who'd suddenly come into a lot of cash right around the time his cousin was stealing millions of dollars. I compiled everything into a comprehensive file and made copies. Then I made some phone calls. The first call was to the FBI office in Boston. I explained that I had information about the Tommy Richardson case that might be relevant to their ongoing investigation into missing funds. The second call was to the local newspaper. I told them I had documents that might shed new light on a major embezzlement case from 5 years ago, and that it involved a prominent local businessman. The third call was to the state attorney general's office. I explained that I had concerns about potential money laundering activities by a licensed real estate agent in our area. I didn't make any accusations. I just shared information and asked questions. Let the professionals decide what to do with it. By Monday morning, the wheels were in motion. The FBI agent I'd spoken with was very interested in my information. He asked me to come to Boston to meet with their financial crimes unit. The newspaper was planning to run a story about the potential connection between Greg Palmer and his cousin's embezzlement scheme, and the Attorney General's office was opening a preliminary investigation. But the real fireworks started when Greg found out what was happening. I was in my workshop Tuesday afternoon when I heard a car screech into my driveway. Through the window, I saw Greg's BMW and Greg himself storming toward my front door. He didn't bother knocking. He just walked in like he owned the place. "Where are you, Stedman?" he yelled. "Down here," I called from the basement. He came thundering down the stairs, his face red with rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I looked up from the chair I was sanding. "Working. What does it look like?" "Don't play dumb with me. The FBI called me this morning. They want to talk to me about Tommy's case." "Tommy?" "My cousin, Tommy Richardson." "Oh, right. The embezzler." "You son of a—" He caught himself before finishing the curse. "You did this. You called them." I shared some publicly available information with the appropriate authorities. If that's a problem for you, maybe you should ask yourself why. "There's nothing to find. I didn't do anything wrong." "Then you have nothing to worry about." "This is harassment. I could sue you for defamation." I put down my sandpaper and looked at him. "Greg, let me explain something to you. Defamation requires false statements. I haven't made any false statements about you. I've just shared facts and asked questions." "What facts?" "The fact that you made several large cash purchases right around the time your cousin was stealing money. The fact that you made unusual bank deposits during that same period. The fact that most of Tommy's stolen money was never recovered. Those are coincidences. Maybe they are. That's for the FBI to determine." Greg was sweating now, and not from the heat. "What do you want?" I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I'll give you money, whatever you want." "I don't want your money, Greg, especially if it's stolen money." "It's not stolen." "Then prove it." He stood there for a moment, breathing hard, looking like a trapped animal. Finally, he turned and headed for the stairs. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is." After he left, I called Steve to let him know what had happened. "He came to your house?" Steve sounded concerned. "Yeah, he was pretty upset." "Nick, you need to be careful. If he's really involved in that embezzlement thing, he might be desperate enough to do something stupid." "Like what?" "Like try to hurt you." I thought about that. Steve was probably right. A man facing federal charges might be willing to take extreme measures to protect himself. "I'll be careful," I said. "Maybe you should stay somewhere else for a few days, until this blows over." I'm not running from Greg Palmer. It's not running, it's being smart. But I didn't leave. This was my house, my town, my life. I wasn't going to let Greg Palmer scare me away from any of it. Besides, I had one more card to play. The next morning, I woke up to find all 4 tires on my truck slashed. There was also a note tucked under my windshield wiper. "Drop it, or things get worse." I called the police and filed a report, making sure to mention my recent confrontation with Greg Palmer. Then I called my insurance company and arranged for new tires. But instead of being intimidated, I was energized. Greg had just made his first real mistake. Up until now, everything I'd done had been legal and above board. I'd shared information, asked questions, and let other people draw conclusions. But Greg had just escalated things to a criminal level, and that gave me all the justification I needed to finish what I'd started. I drove to the police station on my spare tire and asked to speak with Detective Morrison, who'd taken my report about the vandalism. "I wanted to add something to my statement," I said. "What's that?" "I think Greg Palmer might be more dangerous than I initially thought. I have reason to believe he's been involved in some serious financial crimes, and now he's trying to intimidate me into keeping quiet. What kind of financial crimes? I explained about Tommy Richardson's embezzlement case and Greg's suspicious financial activities around that time. I also mentioned that the FBI was already investigating the connection. You think Palmer helped his cousin hide stolen money? I think it's possible, and I think he's scared enough about it to start making threats. Detective Morrison took detailed notes and promised to follow up with the FBI. He also suggested I consider taking out a restraining order against Greg. That might be a good idea, I said, but a restraining order was the least of Greg's problems. That afternoon, the local newspaper ran their story about the potential connection between Greg Palmer and the Tommy Richardson embezzlement case. The headline was damning: "Local realtor under investigation in $1 million embezzlement scheme." The article laid out all the circumstantial evidence I'd provided, along with quotes from unnamed FBI sources confirming that they were actively investigating new leads in the Richardson case. By evening, the story had been picked up by the Boston media. Greg Palmer's face was on the 6 o'clock news, identified as a person of interest in a major financial crime investigation. But I wasn't done yet. I'd saved the best for last: a complete dossier of Greg's affair with Alison, including dates, locations, and photographic evidence from my surveillance cameras. I'd also documented his pattern of pursuing other married women in town, complete with names and details. I compiled everything into a comprehensive package and sent copies to Greg's remaining business clients, his professional associations, and every member of the town council. The cover letter was simple: "I thought you should know who you're doing business with." The response was immediate and devastating. Greg's last major client, a development company from Boston, terminated their contract within hours of receiving the package. His professional real estate association launched an ethics investigation, and the town council voted to exclude him from all future municipal business. By Friday, Greg Palmer's real estate business was effectively finished. His office was closed, his partnerships dissolved, and his reputation destroyed. But the personal cost was even higher. Alison called me that evening, sobbing. "Nick, you have to stop this." "Stop what?" "You know what? Greg is falling apart. He's talking about leaving town, abandoning the baby, just disappearing." "Maybe that would be best for everyone." "How can you say that? This is my child we're talking about." "No, it's his child. You made that choice 8 months ago." "He's not ready to be a father. He's scared, he's broke, and now he's facing federal charges." "Sounds like a personal problem." "Nick, please. I know I hurt you, but this baby is innocent. Don't let your anger at me destroy an innocent child's future." I thought about that. She had a point. The baby hadn't asked to be born into this mess. "What do you want me to do, Alison?" "Call off the dogs. Stop feeding information to the FBI and the newspapers. Let him try to rebuild his life." "Why should I?" "Because despite everything that's happened, you're a good man, and good men don't destroy children's futures out of spite." She was trying to manipulate me, appealing to my sense of decency. But the thing was, she was right. I was a good man, or at least I tried to be, and I didn't want an innocent child to suffer because of their parents' mistakes. "I'll think about it," I said. "Thank you." But I didn't have to think about it for long, because the decision was taken out of my hands. The next morning, I woke up to find Greg's BMW parked in my driveway. He was sitting on my front porch, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "We need to talk," he said when I opened the door. "About what?" "About ending this." I poured us both coffee, and we sat at my kitchen table like civilized men. But there was nothing civilized about the conversation that followed. "I'm leaving town," Greg said. "Running away?" "Starting over. Somewhere nobody knows my name or my history." "What about the baby?" "What about it?" "It's your child, Greg." "Is it? How do I know Alison isn't lying about that, too?" I stared at him. "You took the paternity test. You know it's yours. Tests can be faked." "By who? Dr. Kessler?" He shrugged. "I don't know. I don't trust anyone anymore." "So you're just going to abandon your child?" "I'm going to disappear before the FBI decides to arrest me." "Did you do it? Did you help Tommy hide the money?" Greg was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Some of it. Not all of it, but some." "How much?" $500,000. Maybe more. I don't even remember exactly." "Where is it now?" "Gone. Spent. Invested in properties that I've since sold." "So there's nothing left?" "Nothing the FBI can trace back to Tommy." I finished my coffee and looked at this man who'd destroyed my marriage and was now planning to abandon his child. "You're a piece of work, Greg." "I know." "And you think running away solves everything?" "I think it's better than going to prison. What about Alison? What about the baby? They'll be fine without me, better off, probably. I wanted to argue with him, but the truth was, he was probably right. Alison and her child would be better off without Greg Palmer in their lives. When are you leaving? Tonight. Where will you go? Somewhere warm, somewhere far away from here. After he left, I sat in my kitchen and thought about everything that had happened. In the space of a few months, I'd gone from being a married man with a predictable life to being single, wealthy. Greg's departure would eliminate any claim he might have had on Alison's divorce settlement, and free to start over. It wasn't the ending I'd expected, but it was the ending I deserved. That evening I drove to the Rookery for a beer and some conversation. Lou was behind the bar, as always, and the place was buzzing with talk about Greg Palmer's sudden departure. Heard he left town this afternoon, Lou said, sliding me a beer. Just packed up and drove away. Is that right? Yep, left his office, his apartment, everything. Just took what he could fit in his car and disappeared. Interesting. Word is the FBI was getting close to arresting him. Could be. Lou leaned closer. Nick, I don't know what you did to that man, but whatever it was, he had it coming. I didn't do anything, Lou. I just asked some questions. Right. Lou grinned. Well, your questions sure got some interesting answers. I finished my beer and drove home through the quiet streets of my small town. Tomorrow, I'd start the next chapter of my life. I'd rebuild my business, maybe travel a little, certainly date again when I was ready. But tonight, I was content to sit in my workshop and think about how much can change when you stop letting people underestimate you. Greg Palmer was gone. Alison was someone else's problem now, and I was free to be whoever I wanted to be. It had been a long road to get here, but it was worth every mile. 6 months later, I was putting the finishing touches on a custom kitchen for a client in the next town over when my phone rang. It was Alison. Nick, I hope it's okay that I'm calling. What do you need, Alison? I wanted to let you know that I had the baby. A girl. She's healthy and beautiful. Congratulations. Thank you. There was a pause. Nick, I also wanted to apologize. For everything. I know I hurt you, and I know I handled everything badly. Water under the bridge. Is it? It is for me. I'm glad. You deserve to be happy. So do you, Alison. So does your daughter. Her name is Emma, after your neighbor. She was so kind to me during the pregnancy, even after everything that happened. I smiled. Emma Rodriguez had turned out to be a good friend to both of us, in her own way. That's a good name. Nick, there's something else. I never heard from Greg again. He just vanished. I know. Do you think he'll ever come back? No, I don't think he will. Part of me is relieved, but part of me worries about Emma growing up without a father. She'll be fine. You're stronger than you think you are. I hope so. After we hung up, I went back to work on the kitchen cabinets. It was detailed work, requiring patience and precision, the kind of work I'd always been good at. My business was thriving now. Word had gotten around about my craftsmanship, and I had more work than I could handle. I'd even hired an apprentice, a young man from town who reminded me of myself at that age. I'd also started dating again. Nothing serious yet, but I was enjoying the company of a woman named Sarah who taught at the elementary school. She was kind, intelligent, and had no interest in drama or games. We took things slow, which suited both of us fine. Emma Rodriguez and I had become good friends. She often invited me over for dinner, and I'd helped her with some home repairs. Her kids liked me, and I enjoyed having young people around the house again. As for Greg Palmer, he'd kept his word. He'd disappeared completely, leaving no trace of where he'd gone or what he was doing. The FBI investigation had eventually been closed due to lack of evidence, but his reputation in town remained ruined. Sometimes I wondered if I'd gone too far in my campaign against him. But then I remembered the 8 months of lies, the casual cruelty of his affair with my wife, and his willingness to abandon his own child, and I felt no regret. Some people might call what I did revenge. I preferred to think of it as justice. The sun was setting as I finished the last cabinet door and stepped back to admire my work. It was good work, solid and beautiful, built to last for generations, like the new life I was building for myself.